Today we're going to learn about coral reefs. They act as a home to lots of different underwater creatures like fish, as well as turtles and reef sharks. They're really important to the health of our oceans and to our planet. So let's find out some more about them. So looking at this picture here on screen, do you think this is a plant or an animal? I think it looks a lot like a plant, but in actual fact, corals are animals, which is amazing. The coral is very closely related to jellyfish. So jellyfish, you can see there, have got their body and then these long tentacles that come down, and they actually have a mouth that sits in the middle here with the tentacles around it. If you look there on the screen, you can also see a very close-up picture of a coral polyp. That's the name of the animal that makes up the coral. They also have tentacles around the edge and they have a mouth in the middle here. So yeah, it looks a lot like an upside down jellyfish. Most of the corals that you'll see, we'll show lots of pictures of corals in this presentation, they're made up of hundreds of little polyps. So that's really cool. 100 of these little animals all make up one coral. So if you were to go snorkeling, you might see these fuzzy looking branches, which are branching coral. If you were to zoom in, you can see the fuzzy parts are just lots of individual animals. And again, if you zoom in again, you can see what they look like with tentacles around the edge and a mouth in the middle. And here's a video of a coral feeding at night. At night, they use their tentacles to sift through the water and look for any food particles they might be able to get. And they grab hold of them and they feed them into their mouth, which you can see here in this video. So there are hard and there are soft corals. They come in lots and lots of different shapes and sizes, and there are more than 2,000 types of coral. That is a lot of coral. So we're going to talk about the different types of corals now. Hard corals have a skeleton which forms the main structure of coral reefs. This one here is a table coral. It grows up from one point and then grows out just like a table would. When the tables get really big, they shade the sun from the corals underneath. So if you imagine a big table and you're hiding underneath it, you won't see the sun. So the corals underneath it can sometimes starve because they need the sunlight to survive. We'll learn more about that a little bit later. So that's table corals. Next up, we've got branching corals. So branching corals have lots of branches like a tree. Table and branching corals, so those hard corals, they can grow really fast, so up to 10 centimetres per year. You, if you're a little kid, you might only grow 6 centimetres a year. So 10 centimetres a year is loads. But branching coral and table coral are very fragile, so they can break quite easily. So if a big fish or even a scuba diver, if they bump into them, they can break. Which doesn't matter too much when they can grow so quickly, but still, better not to bump into them, isn't it? Branching corals and table corals are also a really good place for small fish to hide. There's lots of spaces for them to get in between and hide away from predators, from bigger fish that can eat them. And you can see that in this video here. Right, the next hard coral we're going to look at is brain coral. So table coral looks like a table, and branching coral looks like tree branches. So brain coral looks like a brain. That's right. The corals can grow really slowly compared to table corals or branching corals. They might only grow 1 centimetre a year, but they are very strong. It takes a lot to break them, which is really good. So hard corals like branching coral, table coral and brain corals, they make the main structure of coral reefs. So when you look at coral reefs, the main bulk of them and what makes them so big and what makes them grow are hard corals. Now soft corals come in lots of different shapes too. So we're going to talk about sea fans first. These are a little bit similar to hard corals in that they also have a skeleton. They wave themselves in the water to collect food. So you might see in hard current sea fans moving like this, and that's them looking for food in the water. You might also find on fan corals seahorses. So we've got here a picture of a pygmy seahorse. A pygmy seahorse is smaller than the tip of my finger. It's super tiny. You can also find little crabs or shrimps or even sea spiders. You even get spiders underwater. And you can see that on that picture there, a little crab holding onto that orange sea fan there. Soft corals, most soft corals, don't have a skeleton or a hard inside. So after they die, or if they die, they'll disappear without a trace. You won't even know they were there. Whereas hard corals, if they die, they leave behind their skeleton. Sponges. Sponges are related to soft coral, but are slightly different as they are made up of one animal. But hard corals and soft corals are made up of hundreds of animals, hundreds of polyps. That's the name of the animal, remember. So sponges are really important as they clean the water. Think about a sponge that you might use in your kitchen or in your bathroom when you're having a bath. Sponges help to get things clean and make things clean. So the same goes for sponges in the ocean. They clean the water. So barrel sponges, you can see a big barrel sponge here on the screen, can be home to sleeping turtles or lobsters. And often you can find little crabs sleeping and hiding in the ridges on the outside of the barrel coral. There's a little purple one there that my sister found on the edge of a barrel coral. So, sea anemones. Those of you who've seen Finding Nemo will recognise anemones probably, and those of you that have been to an aquarium maybe won't recognise an anemone. They're where clownfish live, so where Nemo and his dad lived. These are also very closely related to soft coral, but they actually have a foot. That's right. So they can move around, which most other corals can't. Most other corals, once they grow, they're anchored in place and they don't move, just like a tree would if you think about that. But sea anemones, they can move around the sea floor. Sea anemones can also be home to shrimps and crabs, as well as clownfish, and they come in lots of different shapes and sizes. Here you can see an orangutan crab, and you can also see a little cleaner shrimp. We'll be talking more about the relationship between shrimp and anemones and fish and anemones in our presentation about symbiotic relationships or underwater sea friends. Basically, looking at a sea anemone is like looking at one coral polyp, so one of the animals that makes up the coral, under a microscope. So if you look, there is tentacles there all around the edge and a mouth in the middle. And if you look at the picture of an anemone, you've got tentacles all around the outside and a mouth in the middle as well. So it's very similar. Just like us people do, corals have friends. They have plant friends called algae. The algae is called zooxanthellae, and they live in the coral polyp, and it gives it its lovely colour. So when you're scuba diving or snorkeling, or you might be seeing a coral reef on the television, you can see coral have lots and lots of lovely different colours. They come in purples and blues and oranges, and those amazing colours come from the algae, not from the animal itself, which is really interesting. So during the day, the algae that lives in the coral is busy making food from the sun, just like plants do on land. Almost 90%, so nearly all of the food that our coral has, comes from this process, which is called photosynthesis. So you can see on the screen here what happens to plants on land, and it's very similar underwater. So the plants, the algae, they absorb carbon dioxide from the ocean, and they also take in the energy from the sun. They turn it into sugar and amino acids, so that's the food that feeds the coral and that helps the coral to grow. They also produce oxygen, which goes back into the ocean and is really, really important to help with ocean health and the health of our planet as well. So if you think corals, remember, are eating at night, they wave their tentacles around and they grab food and they feed it into their mouths. And then during the day, they're feeding using photosynthesis. So corals are basically eating all day and all night, which is probably how a lot of grown-ups feel during the lockdown right now. Some of you might have heard of the term global warming or climate change. It's what's happening at the moment to our planet, and it's making the ocean get very hot as a result. So when the ocean gets hot, you get what is called coral bleaching. So coral bleaching happens when the algae makes too much oxygen, which is toxic. So even for us humans, if we have too much oxygen, that can be dangerous for us too. So it's too dangerous for the coral as well. So what the coral does is it kicks the algae out of its home. It's like, go away, I don't need you, you're going to make me sick. So when that happens, the coral is left looking white because obviously the algae gives it its colour. And without the colour, the coral is just white. But the coral isn't dead. It might look like it's dead because it looks like a skeleton. But if you remember, the algae makes nearly all of the food. It makes 90% of the food for the coral. So without it, the coral can go hungry, and over a long period of time, the coral might die. Coral reefs are very, very important. Everything that lives in the ocean has a reason to be there, and it plays a very important part in our ocean health and the health of our planet. So corals of all types are at the bottom of the food chain. They build coral reefs where most fish spend their lives, and it's where they come to eat and sleep. It's also a really important place for bigger fish to come and hunt. It also provides a habitat for other creatures like turtles. So we're going to talk through the food chain of the ocean, going from corals obviously at the bottom. So we'll see next is corallites. These are fish that eat coral. So if you look at this picture here, the white and yellow fish here are butterfly fish, and they eat coral. Coral is their food. So the thing that's next above them are herbivores. Herbivores eat algae. So they eat the algae that you find in the coral, the plant that gives them the coral. And so to eat that, they take a big chunk of the coral. They digest only the plant, they digest only the algae, and the rest, so the coral, the white bit that you might see in the picture before, they poop out as sand. So when you've been walking on a nice beach, you've actually been walking on parrotfish poop. Parrotfish contribute to a huge amount of sand that is found on our beaches. Next, you might get small carnivores, which they eat smaller fish. So grouper perhaps might eat the butterfly fish that we saw earlier. Next up are bigger carnivores, and they eat bigger fish. So they might even eat small grouper perhaps, things like tuna, which I've pictured here. Small tuna or perhaps smaller barracuda. And finally, top predators or apex predators. They'll take on just about anything really. Sharks are really cool creatures, and we've got a presentation all about those coming up later. So sharks, even big sharks, might take on things like whales, seals, smaller sharks, and even turtles. Here you can see the ecosystem as a whole. So the coral reef as a habitat and a food source for all the other fish on the reef. And without it, the reef just wouldn't exist. So it's really, really important. So coral reefs are also very important to the land. They protect the shore by calming down the waves as they come in from the open ocean. If you've been to the beach where there isn't a coral reef, so if you go to Dover, for example, if you're going to Calais on the ferry, or if you're in Brighton, there's no coral reef there, and you can get some really big waves there, and that's why you might get surfers there. A coral reef can make the waves smaller by over 80%, so bring the size down from 10 all the way down to 2, which is really small. They can also reduce the strength of the wave by almost 100%. So maybe bring the wave down from a big wave, as you can see in that picture there, to nothing, where the sea is nice and flat. And what that does is it protects our beaches and stops them from getting smaller and smaller as the big waves can erode away at the beaches. And it also helps prevent coastal flooding, which is really important for the people that live in seaside towns. As you can see from this presentation, coral reefs are really, really important, not just to other fish in the ocean or to our planet, but just to us as well on land. So you might be asking, what are some things that you can do to help protect coral reefs? There are a few things you can do at home, and there are a few things that you can do once you get outside to the beach or if you're in the ocean yourself. So there are big things you can do, like try to stop using single-use plastic. So that might be plastic bottles or using plastic straws. Try to use things that and use plastic that you can use more than once is a really good way of helping the planet, and that in turn helps the ocean and the coral reefs. Remember things like turning off your TV if you're not watching it, or turning off lights when you're not using them. Using less electricity will really, really help coral reefs and also the rest of the planet. It's a really good, easy thing for you to do at home. If you are out at the beach or if you're going swimming, you can look for sun cream that is reef safe. Lots of sun cream, unfortunately, isn't very healthy for our oceans or for coral reefs, but there are some reef-safe sun creams available, and I can put a list of some of them in the comments below the video. Other ways you can help are looking to reduce your carbon footprint. So right now we're obviously inside the house a lot, and perhaps if you're going to the shops you might choose to walk where normally you might drive. So perhaps you can continue to walk, or if you're going to school, can you ride a bike or can you take a scooter? What ways that you travel that mean you're not getting in the car? Can you take a public bus or get on the train? That way you're sharing the load of the travel with other people, and that reduces your carbon footprint. If you go to the beach or if you're underwater, there's a rule that we use, which is take only pictures and leave only bubbles or leave only footprints. So shells and bits of coral that you might find belong in the ocean, so be sure to leave them at the beach or in the water where you find them. Make sure you don't buy any coral or ocean souvenirs. Those things belong in the sea. And if you are interested in snorkeling, or if you've been snorkeling, or perhaps you might be a scuba diver already, you might have your junior bubble maker, or you might have a junior paddy. Remember that when you're scuba diving or snorkeling, try not to touch the coral. As we learned, some coral can be quite fragile and can take some time to grow back. So make sure just to stay on the surface or stay away from the coral and enjoy the view, because there's lots of lovely, lovely things to see. So thank you very much for watching. I'm sorry if you tried to tune into the Facebook Live and it didn't work. We'll be doing Facebook uploads for the other videos from now on. If you have any questions, please pop them in the comments and I'll respond. Also in the comments, I'll be sharing a link to a downloadable activity pack that you can do if you have a printer at home, with some questions. There'll be some cutout activities so you can mix and match and learn about corals and different coral types. And there's also a colouring in page. And for those of you that don't have a printer at home, there is an online quiz version as well that you can complete. So please take pictures. I'd love to see that you guys are learning all about coral reefs. And finally, the next presentations we'll be learning about will be reef fish. So we'll have 2 different sessions on different reef fish. We'll be learning about sharks, turtles, manta rays and rays, cephalopods, so things like octopus, cuttlefish and squid, symbiotic relationships or ocean friends, mangroves, and about plastic pollution. So stay tuned for all of those lessons over the next few weeks.